Hello, everyone. It's Dr. Manjari Nadkarni, Ayurvedic MD, registered holistic nutritionist. And today on the histamine intolerance series, we are going to discuss about what exactly to avoid and what should you be eating for a histamine intolerance diet. We have been talking about histamine intolerance this entire month. Histamine intolerance is nothing but the inability of your body to break down histamine, which will cause you to have either an upset stomach or headache or different allergy like symptoms. And this is because of the malfunction of the enzyme called DAO. So, certain foods, we've been discussing which can trigger it. So, today we are going to talk about the histamine intolerance diet in details. So, when we are getting started with the histamine intolerance diet, it is super important to understand there are different modes of action of foods on different aspects of histamine. An example is, some foods naturally contain high amounts of histamine, and histamine is formed as in the deterioration of the food which is perishable in the form of microbial fermentation, and when the fruit ripens there can be more of the histamine in it, right? So certain foods will contain histamine, certain foods will contain other biogenic amines, right? So other biogenic amines are something to be considered because they are first broken down by the enzyme DAO, and DAO is then going to break down the histamine. So if you are eating foods that are rich in different biogenic amines, what's going to happen is your body is going to engage all that enzyme called diamine oxidase for breaking down these other biogenic amines, and it's not going to break down histamine that easily. Then there are certain category of foods, certain category of additives which are going to liberate histamine from your body from certain cells called mast cells, and that is going to create more of those reactions. And then there are certain foods which will also increase the inhibition of the DAO or the diamine oxidase. So you are not going to break down your histamine. And then there are certain foods that will create more of the intestinal permeability, which is known as the leaky gut syndrome. So when you have leaky gut syndrome, all these macromolecules can enter your digestive tract, and there is the more of the risk in developing different food allergies, IgE or IgG type, and often this is going to be a long term problem for you. So if you are someone who is struggling with histamine intolerance or is suspecting histamine intolerance, the symptoms are mentioned in the first two videos of this series. If you go on to my YouTube page Manjiri Ayurveda, or if you scroll back to my Facebook page and check under the videos, we have done talks about what exactly is histamine, how do we find out if you have a histamine intolerance. So that talk is already done. Today we are going to talk about the specific foods itself, and this is for you if you are someone who is constantly eating fermented foods. So for example, this is why I talk about making sure your diet is very specific to your body and your body's requirements, not just an Ayurvedic dosha type, right? An example I like to give here is whenever we look at a histamine related disorder, you are also going to see that there is a pitta flare up, right? And an example is, any fermented food which will further aggravate your pitta is not going to work well for you, even though they say it's really good for your gut health. So this is where you want to understand and customize your diet, and this is where Ayurveda really shines in helping you understand the perfect diet for you. So let's talk about what foods are we avoiding, what foods are we eating. So number one thing is I would avoid everything that contains histamine. right? So an example is, anything fermented foods, as I said, whether we are talking about kombucha, we're talking about kefir, we are talking about alcoholic beverages, we're talking about soy sauce, vinegar, pickled vegetables, those contain a lot of histamine. A lot of cheeses that have been processed, right? So the aged the cheeses, the more histamine it's going to contain. The longer a food ferments, the more histamine that food is going to contain. So it is important to stay away from all fermented foods, anything that is not fresh, even when it comes to meats. Like, if you are looking at dry cut meats, if you're looking at sausages, if you're looking at fish that is cured, or dried fish or salted fish, if you're looking at meat that is cured, salami, sausages, any kind of pork, ham, dishes, when it's not for fresh, it is going to contain a lot of histamine, and that is going to be detrimental to your gut if you have histamine intolerance, or if you have a lot of allergies. Similarly, there are foods which contain other biogenic amines. Example is bananas and pineapple, pears, peanuts. Peanuts are extremely allergenic. Peanuts are one of the foods that I find in my practice, next to gluten and dairy, that most people react to. Extremely pitta provoking, extremely sprayed, because they are ground nuts. They actually end up absorbing a lot of pesticides from the soil. And peanuts, unless you buy organic, not really healthy. Grapefruit, raspberries, different legumes like lentils, beans, different soy products contain different biogenic amines. Kiwis, oranges, papaya, wheat germ. So these are all the foods that you should be avoiding if you are struggling with histamine intolerance. Now, there are also certain foods that can liberate the histamine from mast cells. And especially, there is something called mast cell activation disorder, which is more advanced condition than histamine intolerance. So in that condition as well, you should be avoiding these foods. An example is alcohol and its degradation product acetaldehyde, strawberries, nuts, walnut, cashews, seafood, any kind of shellfish, any crustaceans, whether it's clams, crab, mussels, crayfish, chocolate or cocoa, right? So that is definitely one of the histamine liberators. Tomatoes, ketchup, tomato juice. Rather, tomatoes fall into different categories of food. They also contain a lot of histamine, and they also liberate a lot of histamine from the food. Ketchup, tomato juices, citrus fruits, and certain medications as well. That is going to be a problem here. So you will be avoiding all these foods, and you have to understand that dioxin, which degrades the which has no direct effect or against the histamine liberators, right? So dioxin is the DAO amine that's given, diamine oxidase enzyme that's given to patients having histamine intolerance, but dioxin is going to have no effect on histamine liberators. It will have effect on histamine containing foods, right? So this is not really going to work. And then there are the DAO inhibitors, right? So DAO inhibitors, again, alcohol, different biogenic amines, certain medications will be there, theobromine, mate tea, so certain things found in tea, certain things found in chocolate. Again, alcohol, when it comes to intestinal permeability, hot spices, chili peppers, curry, etc., is going to be a problem when it comes to histamine intolerance. So these are certain things you need to be aware of. So, lentils, yellow mung dal, if they're split, they're definitely going to be better. Chocolate is something that has to be avoided, unfortunately, on the histamine intolerance diet. Chocolate is something that has to be avoided. You can go for carob. So, carob is a chocolate replacement. You can definitely use that. And soybean, especially fermented soy products, those are going to be more difficult. My general rule of thumb is the bigger the bean, the more challenging it's going to be to digest. So any smaller beans, moth beans, mung beans are going to be way better digested, right? So what again, you have to avoid any dry aged meats when it comes to meats. Making sure you're going to avoid anything that's preserved meat, smoked meat, preserved meat, sausages, salamis, any kind of meatloaf, spreads, cold cuts, etc. So all those have to be avoided. But you can have natural fresh meat, whether it's poultry, goat, pork, as fresh as possible. Getting it from the butcher is the best option. Chicken, eggs are perfectly fine as well. When it comes to fish, again, it has to be fresh caught fish, and any canned fish like tuna or marinated fish, salted, dried, smoked, pickled fish, pickled eggs, all pickled things have to be avoided. Fish sauces have to be avoided, and all shellfish, crustaceans, mussels, lobsters, shrimp, prawns, everything has to be avoided. So if it's fresh, definitely you can have it. White fish or even salmon is perfectly fine. When it comes to histamine intolerance, you also will have to avoid a lot of dairy that is fermented. So whether we are talking about kefir, we are talking about buttermilk, we are talking about sour milk products, feta cheese, some people can tolerate it in small amounts, but the more the aged the cheeses, matured cheeses, hard cheeses, aged cheeses, gouda, fondue, blue cheese, which will have natural mold, all those are to be avoided. Fresh cheese like mozzarella, cottage cheese, you can have it in small amounts. Raw milk, pasteurized milk, butter, cream, whey is perfectly okay. When it comes to any kind of breads, sourdough, which is usually the healthier version of bread, which is easier to digest, has to be avoided on the histamine intolerance diet, and especially anything with yeast. So, yeasted breads have to be avoided. If you bake a fresh bread with baking soda, baking powder, that is perfectly fine. So, yeast free bread, you can have it. um, you can have, buckwheat is one of my favorite grains. In form of grains, you can definitely have it. You can have different kinds of flour, gluten free flours, potato, corn, rice, etc. is perfectly fine as well, but try to use it as fresh as possible. In terms of vegetables, sauerkraut, spinach, tomatoes, eggplant, avocados. So avocados are here, so avocados are going to create issue with histamine intolerance. Spinach, tomatoes, eggplant, so all the healthy foods, olives as well. And when we talk about legumes, lentils, beans, especially soybeans, are going to be more of the problem. Pickled vegetables are going to be more of the problem, and any kind of mushrooms like morels or different kinds of mushrooms should be ideally avoided. Green beans are perfectly fine. Fresh olives which are not fermented are fine, and small amounts of fresh mushrooms some people can definitely tolerate. All other vegetables are perfectly fine. When it comes to berries, strawberries, raspberries have to be avoided. A lot of citrus fruits like oranges have to be avoided. Bananas, pineapple, kiwi, pears, papaya, guava have to be avoided. Overripe foods, so if you are having foods and you're ripening them too much, that is a problem. So yes, Maria, everything fermented is a problem when it comes to histamine intolerance diet. So that is why I say, there is no direct mention of histamine intolerance in Ayurveda. But when you look at the characteristics of food that are avoided, you can understand that it is a condition where the pitta has increased, but the agni has diminished, right? So high pitta, you're reacting to everything that is provoking the pitta. At the same time, you have leaky gut, so your agni is diminished. And when we talk about the leaky gut syndrome, we are mainly looking at vata aggravation in the larger intestine as well from an Ayurvedic perspective. Now, strawberries, raspberries, as we mentioned, all those fruits have to be avoided. You could have apples, peaches, apricots, melons, mango, lychee, cherries, blackberries, blueberries, cranberries, currants, coconut is perfectly fine as well. In terms of nuts, walnuts, cashews, peanuts, you have to avoid. You can have macadamia nuts, chestnuts are perfectly fine. Um, in terms of vinegars, in terms of condiments, a lot of vinegars have to be avoided. Yeast extract, monosodium glutamate, the bouillon cubes, broths that have been made in the stores, soy sauce, hot spices, all of those have to be avoided. Any table salt, garlic is perfectly fine. Distilled white vinegar is fine. Some people can tolerate apple cider vinegar as well. But all the yeast extract and fermented vinegars are to be completely avoided. Cocoa powder, cocoa mass, like dark chocolate, white chocolate, all kinds of chocolate have to be avoided. Some will say that carob has to be avoided, but some people can tolerate carob better. And all, like, you could have some stevia, some honey in terms of sweeteners, that is perfectly fine. From a beverage perspective, number one thing to avoid is alcohol. So alcoholic beverages for sure avoid. Energy drinks for sure avoid, they have a lot of caffeine as well as theobromine. Juices, sodas, avoid those. You could have herbal teas. Rooibos tea is perfectly fine. Almond milk, rice milk, oat milk is perfectly fine. Green tea in small amounts is perfectly fine. So those are some things you could have. So Maria saying, so everything fermented is a problem. Most definitely, everything fermented is a problem when it comes to histamine intolerance. And so pitta and vata both aggravated in the gut. Yeah, small intestine as well as colon. Yes, and all over the body. Yeah, sure, because for sure, because mast cells are present, all over the body. So when you are going to have a mast cell related reaction, your entire body, you're going to see pitta aggravation, you're going to see vata aggravation, other signs as well. So that is super important to understand that those things have to be avoided. Okay. So any other questions for today? Yeah, coffee, some people can actually tolerate the decaf version, but I would definitely avoid anything, and often understand that these conditions are not seen solitary. So often I will see somebody having histamine intolerance, and often I will see that there is a burnout phase as well, right? So if you are in the burnout phase, where we call it adrenal fatigue, some people call it adrenal imbalance, adrenal overactivation. Wherever your adrenal glands are involved, you want to make sure that you are staying away from any stimulants like caffeine or theobromine or any stimulants, right? So often when you see histamine intolerance, you will see that so much stress is created in the body that the adrenals are often off balance as well. And histamine intolerance, again, on my YouTube channel, I had a comment that, oh, I was perfectly fine, and post pregnancy, I started having histamine intolerance. Some people started developing histamine intolerance post, some kind of vaccination. So if you go through a period where there is some kind of shift in your hormones, in your digestive tract, or there is some life incidents, you may notice that histamine intolerance has been developed after that. Psyllium husk, guar gum, you should be able to tolerate in small amounts in the histamine intolerance diet. So small amounts, definitely you should be able to tolerate. The psyllium husk has actually worked well for some of my clients. Certain things like licorice work extremely well. They are pitta balancing, they are vata balancing, they help repair the leaky gut, and these are wonderful herbs, especially licorice. But that is my topic for next week. So, next week, I'm going to talk mainly about Ayurvedic solutions for overcoming histamine intolerance with diet and herbs. And I'm going to talk about different herbs, especially like like licorice for histamine intolerance. So licorice works fantastic. Aloe vera is another one. There are some more herbs that you can use for histamine intolerance to repair the gut lining, but also to help your body stop from overreacting to this histamine, right? That will also help you clear excess histamine from the system. So that's my topic for the next session for next week. The next two sessions are going to be recorded, so I am not going to be live. I'm traveling, so I won't be live for the next two sessions. But if you post your questions below, I will make sure I come back and answer those questions. So the next topic that we talk about on May 22nd is Ayurvedic solutions for overcoming histamine intolerance with diet and herbs. And May 29th, we are going to talk about specific probiotics for histamine intolerance, because certain probiotics can create more histamine in your system, certain strains of probiotics. So when we look at probiotics, we have to be very specific when it comes to histamine intolerance. So that's my topic for May 29th. So if you like today's session, you can share it with your friends, your family, or if you suspect somebody reacting to histamine intolerance, please share this video with them. You can either tag them in this video, or you can share this video with them privately. And if you have any questions about histamine intolerance, if you suspect you could be struggling with it, feel free to message me, and we could set up a 15-minute free consultation to discuss how we can work together to help you feel the best with the help of Ayurveda as well as holistic nutrition. Thank you so much for watching this live, and I will sign off now. I will see you next week for another session of Wellness Wednesday. Also, if there are any specific topics you want me to talk about for the month of June and July, please let me know, and I'll be more than happy to discuss those topics in forms of the Wellness Wednesdays. Thanks and have a wonderful evening.